This is a recording of Editors Speak, How to Self-Evaluate Your Story Structure. This was a panel at the Story Structure Deep Dive hosted by the Weeknight Writers Group and sponsored by Renaissance Press. For more information about the Weeknight Writers Group, Renaissance Press, or any of the panelists, be sure to check out the video description.
Great. Hey everyone, I'm Nicole, and this is the Self-Assess Your Story Structure panel. I'll let the panelists introduce themselves, and we can start with Crystal.
All right. Hi, I'm Crystal Kirkham. So I'm a multi-genre author. I write mostly dark fiction of various speculative fiction genres. I am also a freelance editor. I run a small independent press, and I'm a podcaster as well.
Great. And Emily?
Hi, my name is Emmeline, and I am an author as well. I write middle grade and young adult fiction. Currently, I'm working on a young adult sci-fi dystopia. And I also freelance as a proofreader, copy editor, and ghostwriter.
Great. Jenny?
Hi, I'm Jenny. I'm a freelance editor. I'm one of the co-founders and board members for RevPit on Twitter. And I'm just outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, where it is very hot today. So I'm very happy to be in the air conditioning with all of you lovely people.
I'm also in North Carolina. I'm in Chapel Hill and can confirm that it is very hot. And Hannah?
Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah. I'm a literary agent with Bel Castro Agency and also a freelance editor on the side. I mostly am in the kidlit space, so picture book to young adult, but I also dabble in some adult genres.
Great. And Steffi?
Hi, everyone. I'm Steffi. I'm primarily a freelance editor, and I've been editing for 6 years now. I'm also an editor at Right Plan, and I wrote the Great Asian American series published by Capstone Press. And I'm calling from Taiwan, but I'm US based.
Wow. Awesome. So I guess just to start, if we could just go around and I'll pass it to one person, and then that person can pass it to the next person if they want. But what about this panel made you want to join? And we can start with Hannah.
Cool. So I think one of the things that I often see just in freelance editor world is a lot of people really struggle to self-edit themselves. We talk about finding critique partners and beta readers, and those are all really, really wonderful to have. But learning how to give critique to others, sometimes it's a lot easier when you think about giving it to others rather than giving it to yourself. So I think that's one of the reasons why I thought this panel was really interesting. Is just to learning to look at your own manuscript because you're just so close to your own story. You're so close to it, and sometimes I think we all have blinders on. So learning some of those self-editor tools, I think, can be something that is extraordinarily valuable, not only for your own manuscript, but it also can make you a stronger writer, a stronger critique partner, and a stronger beta reader.
Cool. And if you want to just call on the next person.
Oh, sure. Over to you, Steffi.
I agree with everything Hannah said. It's so important to be able to look at your book and manuscript in a way that is a little more objective. It's very hard to feel. And it helps to have like a toolkit of knowledge and like writing techniques ready for when you feel like you are just looking at words and you have no idea how to put any of it together into a well-structured, clear, well-told story. And the other thing about this panel that made me say yes is that I was a panelist in a different conference hosted by Diana I think sometime last year, and it was a wonderful experience. There are a lot of writers that join these conferences that ask really great questions, and it's such a good learning experience for everyone. Over to Crystal.
Yeah, I'm gonna say that you both really knock it out of the park on why this is something that I wanted to do as well. I've seen a lot of authors who send their stuff to editors way sooner than they should. And it's really important to get the most out of the editing experience, to know as much as you can about getting your book as far as you can before you send it to someone, because you're spending good money on editors. They're not cheap. Even your cheap editors aren't cheap. and it's and I really hate watching, especially a lot of the starting out authors not realizing that they could have taken it so much further and they could have gotten so much more out of the experience. And it's such a learning process, and I just love helping people further their knowledge. So who hasn't? Emily?
Thank you. Everything everyone else said, I want to add two more things. You know, like Crystal just said, editors are not cheap. And I've been a freelance editor for almost a decade now. And I'm someone who loves to edit so much that I will edit myself while I'm writing, which is, you should never do. But I do think that while I don't encourage writers to edit, to self-edit as they're writing, I do encourage them to, what's a popular saying, write the first draft for yourself and write the second draft for your editor. One of the best things that a person can do is structure their story in such a way that it's laid out clearly for them. Because if your story is confusing to you, it's going to be confusing to your audience. If it feels convoluted to you, it's going to feel convoluted to the audience. So I do think that learning to self-edit and structure your story and get the characters, the words, the worlds out of your head and onto a paper in a cohesive fashion is not just a time saver, but it's a money saver. And to Monique, who just said, I hate formatting. I hated formatting too, until I stopped doing it last minute. When I formatted my work before I put any words on the paper, it was smooth sailing from there.
Great. And I think Jenny is the last one.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Yeah, just to build off of what everyone else has said, yes, editing is expensive. Being able to evaluate your own story is a really important skill as you move forward in the process of publishing as well, regardless of sort of your path to publication. You can get stories out faster, you can be more efficient, you can write better stories when you understand how to look at your own work and be a little bit more analytical. And so I think that for me, there were two factors really in wanting to be on this panel. One is that I think a lot of authors, even authors who've been around for a little while, don't always necessarily understand the full revision process. And a lot of times that means they'll jump into revisions and just kind of fix a few words and think, okay, well, I'm done. So I want to talk about content and sort of developmental self-editing some. And then the other part of it is that I have ADHD and I wasn't diagnosed until I was an adult, but it helped me having it, but not knowing I had it means that I developed some really interesting sort of brain tricks that I didn't even know I had. I just thought everybody did that. That really helps me kind of break things down into manageable steps. And I think that that's sort of one of my strengths. So I like to be able to help other people learn how to do that.
Great. Sorry,
I was also diagnosed really, really late with ADHD. I was diagnosed at 26, so 10 years ago. And I also developed a bunch of coping mechanisms before then.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I think that, the sort of traditional way to get published is very, meant for folks who aren't neurodivergent, is very meant for, folks that can afford to hire an editor, things like that. So I'm wondering what tips y'all might have for finding someone that you can go over your work with, and that kind of like second pair of eyes. And we can start with Steffi.
I'm so sorry, it cut out. Can you repeat that question?
Sure. What tips you might have for, if after you have been able to kind of self-assess to find a second person, an editor, that if you might not have the resources to pay for one, where else can you go for like a second set of eyes?
I always recommend that people find beta readers, regardless of whether or not they hire an editor. It's good to have a first opinion from people that they trust, people who are willing and able to give feedback about their book, and feedback that they can use to look at their own story differently before they ever send it to anyone else. It can just be so helpful in just knowing that, hey, this is a book that people feel this way about. And then you can evaluate yourself whether you agree with that. But aside from sending to beta readers, I always recommend that people read not just craft books, but books that are inside their genre, even books that are outside of their genre, and to read it from an evaluating standpoint and see what works for these books and whether these are elements that they find in their own books. And I've also found that writers sometimes benefit from reading books geared toward editors. And sometimes if they're not able to hire an editor or just not in that stage just yet, sometimes I found that reading those books have been really helpful for them. Over to Hannah.
Definitely seconding the things that Steffi has said. Critique partners, a good critique partner is seriously worth their weight in gold. I will sing the praises of wonderful CPs till the day I die. I think that learning to give feedback can also help you to learn how to take and incorporate feedback. It can help you be on the lookout for things in your own work, again, to make you into a stronger self-editor. They're also, one of the great things about CPs is that they are free. You don't have to pay for CPs. I know that sometimes, particularly some of the heavier editing, developmental editing, line editing can run a little expensive. So it's something that if you have the resources to do so, great, but it is never a requirement for traditional publishing or anything like that. So just to reiterate that, even though it's by all means, if you do have the resources, go for it, but not a requirement, just to reiterate that. I also want to, I don't know if I'm allowed to do this, but like take a moment to plug Jenny's event, Rev Pit, where it's a once a year contest put on by editors for authors, and not only can you win a free developmental edit with that, but the professional editors associated with the event are really good at just dropping knowledge on small little tweetable tips, things like that. So in addition to looking for contests like Rev Pit, I also suggest following different authors, different editors, literary agents on Twitter. They can sort them into a list if it feels overwhelming for you. They are a lot of times linking to different blogs and other free resources that can make you into a stronger writer and kind of do more of the self-taught things. And I guess over to Jenny.
Yeah, I think, so the thing I run into a lot, the questions I get a lot about beta readers, critique partners, I totally agree with what everyone has said about them. I think you should definitely do everything you can for free before you pay anyone anything. And that's not always an option. And, I get that. But hang out where writers are. There's lots of great online spaces for writers. Twitter can be a great place. It definitely has a dark side. So, you got to be careful about who you follow and block with abandon. But also, you can find some really great people there, some really great information. So the other thing that I hear a lot is, what about if I'm not getting like strong enough feedback, So I often recommend sending a set of questions with the manuscript to your beta readers. Jamie Gold has a great set of questions on her website, and you can just search on Google, Jamie, Jami Gold beta reader questions. It's big structural kinds of things, like what parts were boring and what parts were exciting, and things that will really help the reader think a little bit more analytically about the story than just sort of saying like, I like it or I didn't like it, because that can be there can be a little bit of trial and error involved in getting feedback from beta readers and critique partners. So if you don't just find one person and hit it off, definitely keep at it, because it's something that can take a little bit of time.
I would imagine also that, kind of questions like that, even if you're not working with someone else right now, would be helpful in for you evaluating your own work. If you're thinking, oh, what's boring, then you might be able to better identify those spots. But yeah, if you want to call on the next person, Jenny.
Yeah, Emmeline?
Sure. I would say just get as much free information as you can, like some of the other ladies have said. I am a big fan of the Writer's Market, the publishing guide that's published once a year, because it lets you know what specific agents and or publishing houses are looking for, and like the sort of material that they publish, that they represent, and how they would want query letters to be formatted. I'm a big fan of reading any editor's resource guide so that you can at least get the structure and the formatting the way that you want to. I'm a big fan of any books on sentence structure and grammar. And I also highly recommend following editors on YouTube, because then you can get the information that you need. And this is going to sound terrible. You can get the information that you need without actually having to interact the way that you do on Twitter. Sometimes when writers and editors get on Twitter, you have to filter a lot for the information that you need. As you just said, sometimes it's kind of hit or miss who you're following. And so when you follow editors on YouTube, though, you get the information that you need really, really quickly, and you have more time to get back to what you should be doing, the thing that you're avoiding doing, writing. I'm going to call on Crystal.
Alrighty. So, I mean, you guys have all covered pretty much everything when it comes to trying to find as many resources as you can to help you get there. Not everybody's as lucky as me. My CP is actually an editor for a publishing house. But if you can find one of those, snag them and never let them go, and give them every gift they ever want under the sun every time you can. But the biggest thing is, if you're looking for people, we all think writing is a very solitary thing. But it pays to get involved with the writing community, whether it's Twitter or somewhere else, or just trying to meet other writers. Because the biggest thing is, when you're looking for someone, and I can't remember who mentioned it, is not every beta reader, early reader, alpha, or CP that you use is going to have a feedback style or even a writing style that works well. So I've had people like, well, this doesn't work for me. And I'm just like, but this is the type of story it is, and this is the style it's written in, and they don't understand how that works. And it's finding the right person to give you the kind of feedback that maybe you don't want, but that you actually need. Because not all feedback you're going to like. And learning to receive that feedback as well is a part of being the person who gives it. It's so joining any sort of group that does, God, my brain is just not working very great today. Any sort of writers group where you can get feedback from a few different people and maybe find somebody that you work well with. And I know there's a lot of writing groups on Discord. I'm a part of one, and we do a lot of shared feedback. And they actually have an entire section dedicated into how to give feedback and what kind of feedback that people are looking for at certain stages. And it's a really great resource to learn from. So definitely YouTube, podcast, but big thing is just try and get involved. It's really hard when you're an introvert. It's a little bit easier when there's a screen in between you and the other person because you don't have to respond right away and you can actually think about what you're going to say. But just get involved and start finding people that you just work with is probably the biggest thing you can do to find people to help you along on your journey.
Great. So I mean, I know for me, I have spots that, you know, I really struggle with when I'm self-assessing. Like, I know this isn't quite right, but I'm having a really hard time, you know, figuring out why and what to do about it. And I'm wondering what those spots might be for y'all and what you've done about that. So we can start with Emily.
I'm sorry, please repeat the question. My internet was glitching there.
Sure. Yeah. Technology is hard. But yeah, just what your weak spots might be when, you know, when self-assessing your writing and what you've done to kind of help yourself move through that.
Sometimes I kind of weave in and out of different writing styles without being aware. Or I will weave out of the past and present tense or future tense without being aware. I will fluctuate from first person to third person narration without being aware. And this is because I have ADHD and I have read so many books from so many authors of so many different genres before I could even write that I feel like all of their styles are inadvertently influencing me now. So one of the things that I always do when I sit down to write for the day is to read back over what I read the day before and with fresh eyes fix the situation so that I can give my story structure a cohesive voice. So that's a weak point for me. I mean, like I said, there's little tips and tricks to work around it. I would say to any writer, don't try to make yourself perfect to the point where writing doesn't feel fun anymore. Whatever the problem is, it's fixable. It's not the end of the world. So just remember that.
And if you want to call on the next person.
Oh, yes. Sorry,
Yeah.
Hannah.
No worries.
Yes. So I think for me, this largely depends on where a writer might be in their project. If you have a completed manuscript and you're like, yes, even if this is a, you know, a zero draft or first draft, and you're kind of wondering, is this good? I don't really know. I wrote it in a flurry or what have you, or if you've been really thinking about it for a while, whether you had an outline or not. One of the things that I always suggest for writers to do after they have a complete manuscript is this thing called a reverse outline. A reverse outline, I see in the comments people wanting to talk a little bit more about structure, and a reverse outline can help you do just that. A reverse outline, I'll shoot a link over in the chat here in a second for a great resource. A lot of writers do it in an Excel document where you literally go chapter by chapter or beat by beat and make sure that each scene, each chapter is not only moving your plot along, but it's also doing something for your character development. I always am telling writers to lead with character. A character is going to be the thing that really hooks your reader into your story. So I'm always suggesting to foreground your characters. With a reverse outline, it can help you identify places that are lagging in your plot, places that are lagging in character development, and it can also help you identify places that maybe a scene is doing a little too much for you to scale back. So a reverse outline, especially for people who are more visual, can really help you identify how the structure of your plot is going. Now, when it comes to just kind of identifying smaller on a scene by scene basis, I'm a really big fan of positivity passes. And I know we often talk about doing positivity passes for your betas, for your CPs, but also do a positivity pass for yourself on a chapter. Point out the things that you really like about your writing that you feel is that you're doing really well. Oftentimes editing and revision, we can focus so much on the things that need improvement, the things that aren't working as well as you want them to work. And I think it's equally important to focus on things that you're proud of, areas that you think you did really well, to just give yourself a little extra boost. Over to you, Steffi.
Seconding everything that's been said so far. And I think for me, it's with the original question, it's funny that you asked this in this panel because structuring has actually been one of the things that I used to struggle with a lot, especially as I switched between genres. And one thing that really helped me was becoming more of a plotter rather than someone who wrote along the way. And different styles work for everyone. And it turns out that pantsing does not work for me. It helps to know where I'm headed so that I know where the book is headed and I can write with that type of shape in mind and know what I'm working toward. And it helped me also to study different types of structures, not just the ones that I'm working with, because when I can identify what works for my book, I can write more confidently and I can write it in a more effective way. And I really recommend learning about all the different ones, especially the ones that aren't the ones we learn about in school as traditional Western structures. I think moving outside of that type of mindset has been very helpful, and I can't recommend it highly enough. Over to Jenny.
I'm just listening to everyone else and going like, you guys are so smart. And then she says, Jenny, and I'm like, oh, that's me. I can't just smile and listen now. So for me, I think it's a mindset thing. I think for me, writing really is revising. Like I really 100% need permission to just write trash in the beginning. Not to say that it is necessarily trash, but I am I like to say I'm a recovering perfectionist. And it really is true. Like I am not like a fun kind of perfectionist. I'm like if it's not perfect in my head, I will be completely paralyzed kind of perfectionist. And so I really need to just let myself just write without the fear of it not being good enough. And so when I can shift from this space where I'm supposed to be holding all of this stuff in my head, so like there's supposed to be character and there's supposed to be, plot and pacing and dialogue and show not tell. It is so much to try to hold all that in your head while also creating a whole world and a story out of literally nothing, maybe just some coffee. So I think that it's really important to not just like we talk about like rough drafts, first drafts, crappy first drafts, those kinds of things. But I think it's important to sort of take it a step beyond memeing it and really understanding that that means your first draft is not only not going to be perfect, it's not supposed to be perfect. Most of those things that you learn in craft books are really better applied in revision. And especially for your first 6 to 8 full manuscripts, until you go through the whole process several times, you're just not really going to start picking up on that stuff. You're still figuring out who you are as a writer. So for me, it's really a lot about mindset, having your brain in the right space so that you can focus on the right thing at the right time instead of, trying to get all of it done at once and therefore not really being able to do anything. Again, that might just be my ADHD. I know it's not, but it feels like it sometimes.
I would agree with everything you just said.
Great. Crystal, if you wanted to answer that question, and then we can move on to some audience questions.
Yeah, so weak spots when self-assessing, especially when it comes to structure. I'm going to say my writing style is actually very similar to Jenny's in that I do self-edit somewhat now. The more I've been an editor, the more I find myself doing it. But my focus on any story when I start is just to get it on the page and worry about what structure it is, what works, what doesn't, after I tell myself that for the story initially. It's done, it's there, now I can actually apply my knowledge in revisions. So learning to self-assess those weak spots really comes down to learning about what you need to look for, what sort of story structures there are, both in Western as well as other types of storytellings, which unfortunately is a very weak area for me because I haven't studied much more than a lot of more of the local Indigenous cultures, legends that I got to grow up around. But as far as Western one goes, which is what you're going to see for a lot of North American fantasy writers. There's a lot of information out there to be able to understand what you're looking for. And to self-assess for structure, I just literally go through every time I have a story and go, well, this is where it starts. What is this? What is this? What is this? And I just kind of look at the major overall brushstrokes, because that actually used to be a really strong weak spot for me. I have so many manuscripts that are finished and they just sit in a folder that I don't want to look at. I'm actually afraid to look at them, because they're terrible. There's no protagonists, there's no real antagonist. And I'm just like, what is this story even doing? And it's learning. The biggest part of learning is to keep writing and then look at what you did and try and figure out what you like and what you don't like. And then ask yourself, why don't I like it? Why is probably the biggest question that you're ever going to be able to ask yourself as a writer is, why this, why that, why don't I like this? Why do I feel like this works? Why do my eyes glaze over when I read my own writing at this point? Generally, that means you're probably doing an info dump or something really not very good. And it's just trying to get in the mindset of not just reading your story, but thinking about why certain parts of your stories are working for you. And that's where self-assessment starts, is asking why.
Great. So some people have dropped audience questions in the chat. Audience, if y'all want to continue to do that, we'll be pulling some questions from there. I'm going to ask a question. Whoever has an answer can go ahead and answer. We'll try to keep these answers brief, just so we can get to as many questions as possible. But also feel free to say if you need to take more time. Also feel free. So we have a question here. How polished does your manuscript need to be before you send it to an editor? And what format should you have your manuscript in when you send it? Anyone can go ahead.
I'll take this one. I always tell authors that it should be as polished as you can get it on your own. There really isn't like a definitive standard, because all authors are sort of in a different place. So what you are able to do on your own is going to be very different than what someone else is going to be able to do on their own. This is where beta readers and critique partners come in. It's craft books. It's kind of all of those things. But there comes a point where you're just sort of like moving one thing to another place, or you are getting completely new ideas about this story that are going to like require a complete rewrite. So I think there's the most difficult part is sort of figuring out where enough is enough for you. And then that's the point at which you should reach out for help. But sadly, there's not like I can't say like, it's going to be 3 drafts. Like you do 3 drafts on your own and then it's ready for an editor, because it's just going to vary depending on the author, their process, what their brain is like, and like so many other factors. So just whenever you get to a point that you feel like it's as done as it can be, I will say it does need to go through at least 2 drafts. We need at least you do your first draft and then you do some structural revisions yourself.
Great. Did anyone else want to add to that? Or I thought that was pretty comprehensive.
Sure. I want to add, because I feel the way the question was asked makes me feel like it was asked the way that I was asking it like 12 years ago, like what the page should look like.
Yeah.
Times New Roman, stick with that, 12 font. Make sure you have 1-inch margins all around, double space everything, indent every chapter. Make sure you have a header with your last name, the manuscript name, the page number, starting from the very first page. There are tons of videos, blog posts, and editor's guides about how to properly format your page. I can't stress this enough, because no matter how great your work is and how amazing your query letter is, if you send something that isn't formatted correctly, a lot of agents will reject it offhand without even bothering to look at it. Like if you can't follow the formatting instructions, the universal industry standards or the specific standards that editor, that publishing house has set, then you're doing yourself a huge disservice. So definitely pay attention to the formatting guidelines.
Yeah, Awesome. We have another question here. What are good resources we authors should be reading to improve the quality of our writing before it's sending to an editor? If anyone has good resources.
The book
Sorry, I didn't
self-editing.
quite hear the question.
Oh, yeah, and then Steffi, you can answer. What are good resources authors should be reading to improve the quality of our writing before sending to an editor?
So the book Self-Editing for Fiction Authors by, I think their names are Dave King and Rennie Brown. I can find the link and send it. Has been recommended a lot, and a lot of authors and editors use it. And I personally have found it very helpful, both as an author and as an editor. And so that's one of them. But I also recommend just craft books in general. There are so many out there that it can be hard to find one that works for you. But generally, if you read around, you can really benefit from each one of these resources in a different way. A lot of people have recommended Stephen King's On Writing. I personally have really enjoyed Bird by Bird. Cannot remember her name right now.
It's Anne Lamott.
Anne Lamott, yes. And Gail Carson Levine's Writing Magic, which is a very short but simple and wonderful guide to writing, and was very formative to me as a writer.
Great. Anyone else?
I'm gonna say.
oh.
Did
No,
you
no,
wanna
go ahead.
Emily?
No.
I was gonna say one of the one of the biggest resources for me has actually been less of your technical stuff on plot and story structure when I'm starting off, and just how to tell a story, just how to create just an interesting narrative. So I think it was mentioned in a previous panel, things like Dan Fine's story, because just learning how to tell a story, any of the stories, even from your own culture or listening to the stories from other culture, you pick up intrinsically a lot of the story structure standards used in those stories just by listening to enough of them and paying attention and just learning how a fascinating story is told. And a lot of things can be fixed on editing, I'll be honest, but being able to tell a good story, no matter how good an editor is, they can't fix that for you. So you need to know how to tell a fascinating story and how to tell a story that brings a reader and the editor into it, because a lot of the nitpicky stuff can be fixed in the long run. It's the story that you tell that you can fix, and having it make sense to the reader, that no matter how good an editor is, some things you just can't do unless you can get that first part done.
Great. Anyone else want to add?
Sure. I recommend the books that were already recommended, but I also like To Comma or Not to Comma by Arlene Miller. So this really doesn't have to do much with the story itself, but it's a matter of punctuation. Sometimes really bad punctuation can throw editors for a loop, and it kind of, for lack of a better term, hurts their eyes and distracts them from the actual story. And a lot of the work that I do, that I get, commissioned to do for writers, is proofreading. And unfortunately, I know a lot of really great writers who have horrible understanding of grammar and syntax. So I highly recommend this book if you want to get that part of your writing on point.
Great. So here we have a question from someone who knows of AuthorTube, like authors making videos on YouTube, but would anyone recommend someone from EditorTube?
Yeah, I actually left my recommendations in the chat. iWriterly, Alexa Don, Ellen Brock, The Life of a Writer. And I know I'm missing one because I follow so many, but these are specifically EditorTube. And I personally, if you're a writer, don't follow AuthorTube. The reason I say don't follow AuthorTube if you're an author is because most of these people are taking you through the process, like their journey as a writer and the process of their current work in progress. You need to be focused on your work in progress and making it as good as possible. And EditorTube is going to be there. It's literally a free resource of well-experienced editors who are putting out these short videos that have exactly the information you're looking for. Mistakes to avoid, type it in. What does an editor look for in a query letter? Type it in, and you have like a 10-minute video on it instead of filtering through all of this, internet advice on Twitter or blogs. So I recommend staying on EditorTube so you can keep focused on your work and find the information that you're looking for to make your writing better.
Great. Anyone else?
Another one I would recommend is, I know there's Dream Foundry, which they host a lot of panels like this, and there's ones that are focused on editing as well as writing, and a lot of those they actually put on their YouTube page as well for people to be able to see for free. And they actually have a lot of really good information and from presentations to panels that are done by professionals as well. So it's another one to go and look at if you're looking for very specific information or sometimes something a little bit more general.
I'd also just like to say, as part of the neurodivergent community, we all learn differently. And so take that into consideration. So like, I don't know anybody on YouTube because I don't learn well through videos typically. Like, I like reading, but I know some people, learn better through audio, or so kind of whatever it is that, is your go-to place. There probably are editors there. So wherever that is for you, I think the tips that the others have given are really fabulous.
I was just thinking that I have a really hard time watching a video that's more than this is why TikTok is really good for me, is that the videos are so short. But this next question is, when you're reading books for pleasure, what are some of the first signs you know the book probably didn't have serious editing?
Okay, so I want to start by saying, I'm just going to get like a little bit on a soapbox here, just a little one though. And that is that if we're talking about self-publishing, you don't ever know what the author accepted from the editor's suggestions. As opposed to in traditional publishing, they're not going to send it to press until their editors are satisfied with it. So in a self-publishing kind of thing, sometimes I'll see comments like, this book should have been edited better. And I'm like, well, we don't know what the editor did. So it's just always a little bit of a tricky situation there. And so in terms of whether or not a story is well edited, it's hard to say, in part because your personal preferences come into play a lot there. So when I am reading, when I'm reading for pleasure, I really prefer things that typically have like a faster pacing and things like that. So if I'm reading something that I thought was going to have a faster pacing and then it doesn't, I can sometimes sort of lapse into, well, it should have been edited better or something along those lines. So I think it's really tricky to get into like whether or not a story was well edited on a content level. When we're talking about like copy editing, spelling, punctuation, grammar, those kinds of things are a little bit more because they're technical. It's a little bit easier to tell when that's been handled well and when it hasn't. But even there, a lot of times, editors have to take conversational style into account. And so, when you're thinking it wasn't well edited, you might be thinking back to what you learned in high school or college, which is not necessarily the same thing as what should be handled in a novel. So I think it's a tricky question that maybe does not have like a very specific definitive answer, unfortunately.
I definitely have the answer to this question. I do think like the structural things that Jenny said, like punctuation and grammar are a dead giveaway, but I also find like smaller things that are a giveaway, and it's just because of the way that I am and the way that I learn. I absorb books really, really quickly. So one of the best ways I can tell that an author needs more editing is when they're talking in circles and constantly repeating themselves throughout the chapter. Like they think that their audience forgot something that they said one chapter ago, or there's lots of information dumping, or they forget a key characteristic or trait about their own character. Like if you forget your protagonist's eye color, things like that. And I can understand why those mistakes happen, which is why self-editing is important. But sometimes these mistakes, they come off sloppy. And if they come off sloppy to the reader, I can only imagine how badly they're coming off to a potential agent or publishing house.
Sure. Great. Here's one for Steffi, who mentioned this earlier, but also for anyone else that has any thoughts. What are types of non-Western structure? Different types of story structure.
Yeah, I cannot possibly speak on all of them, and I'm only really not great. I'm only really familiar with East Asian story structures best, I think, and those are the ones I tend to speak most about. There are others that I have looked into, but I don't feel that I'm the best person to talk about. So if anyone wants to jump in, please do. But I mentioned this about non-Western story structure because there are so many people who say things like show, don't tell, or say that books only should have a beginning, middle, and it should always be in that order, and they should have the rise reaction, and et cetera, et cetera. And East Asian novels don't always work like this. There are a lot of books that will do what some writers might call meandering, where we explore a world first. We explore the everyday life of characters for years, maybe, and there might not be what people would call a climax or an inciting event. And I'm not sure that there's really a term for it. I don't want to name it by myself, but things like that are definitely indicators of different structures that people would say are not structured. And it's just a different understanding. I think a good way to think about this is also to just look at Tolstoy's books, for example, where in American standards, people would say, this goes on for way too long, but others would not view it that way. But yeah, I think if anyone can talk about something other than East Asian structures, I would prefer not to be the one to talk about it.
Yeah, sure. So just jumping in a little bit here, there are so many different kinds of story structures, and I think it would be reductive to simply name all of them, either if they're Western or not, just because there are so many, and I don't think any of us can really speak authoritatively on all of them. One thing, though, that I want you all to think about is most stories are built on some kind of change. So in traditionally in Western storytelling, this change is very much like based on a conflict, either within the character, external conflict that's more global, whether it's the protagonist like learning a lesson or failing to learn that lesson. So I think a lot of times when we think of Western story structures, that's what we're thinking of. However, that's not all there is when it comes to story structures. There are other structures too that, instead of focusing on change in the protagonist or in the characters, can focus instead on the reader instead and inspire a change in them, something that's more enlightenment style rather than something happening to a character. So I also want to push back a little bit too on the fact that all stories have to have a conflict. It doesn't have to be a conflict-focused story. I think that's something that Western structures typically espouse. So there are, of course, like alternate story structures and everything that I think can be a little different when we think about conflict and how this whole idea of change applies to your story.
Great. Yeah, I see a bunch of other questions in the chat. People want to know more about series, more about the reverse outline. So Hannah, if you have any links and want to drop them in the chat, more about structural differences between different types of manuscripts. We are running out of time, but hopefully some of our panelists will be in the Discord after this. There should be a link to that in the chat. And
Oh,
yes, sorry. Yes.
just wanted to add something. I forgot to say this earlier, ADHD, sorry. In addition to following Editor2, I highly recommend that you guys check out some YouTube book reviewers, especially in the genres that you write, and check out the Goodreads reviews for some of the books in the genres that you write, because it is giving you that sort of beta reading feedback. I'm a big believer in learning from other authors' styles, but then also learning from their mistakes, or at least what their readers presume to be mistakes, so you can avoid it as much as possible.
Yeah, Goodreads is definitely a minefield, because sometimes I'm like, oh, that's actually very insightful, and I understand why you gave that book a lower score. And then some of them are like, well, I didn't like poetry, so I didn't like this book. And I'm like, well, why were you reading poetry then? So for sure
those expose themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the good
Legit,
reviews
had a fantasy
are
adventure.
Yeah.
I had a fantasy adventure. They said there was too much change in scenery.
Yeah, that's you can usually tell though which reviews are just, people.
That's definitely trolling, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, just to close out, I wanted to thank the panelists so much, and thank Renaissance Press, who is sponsoring the event. And if the panelists would be willing to share what they're working on now, where we can find their work, and if y'all want to drop any links in the chat, that would be great. And we can start with Jenny, and then when you're done, if you just want to call on the next person.
Okay, I am actually next week launching our 4th round of a project we call Writer in Motion. It was started with the idea of, it actually started in a writing group with the idea of like, wouldn't it be amazing if we could see first drafts of our favorite novels? Because like all we have to compare our own writing to is what's already published. And it's been through like 10 rounds of revisions with 15 different people looking at it. And so it's really hard to sort of get a baseline of like, how good is my writing when I'm drafting, or when I'm revising. So we write flash fiction and then take it through the different stages of revision, where everybody who's participating posted on their blog each week, so that you can see the changes that a very short story, only 1,000 words each, goes through in revisions. And then they get a professional edit of that story at the end. And it's really just, again, to kind of help the authors feel some sense of, we can take this idea and extrapolate it out into our full manuscript. So that's free, open to the public. So it is at writerinmotion.com if you want to get more information. And then we'll go to Hannah.
So I'm mostly hanging out in traditional publishing land for the summer, but you can find me on my website or find me on Twitter, where I try to drop some helpful little tweetable writing tips and things like that for you to take away. Go over to you, Crystal.
Alrighty. We won't get into what I'm working on now, because I tend to work on multiple projects at a time, so that's a very long thing. But if you want to find me, the easiest place to find me is Twitter. I'm usually always on it unless I'm hyper focused on a project, and then you'll see my participation go down. But you'll find me as @CanuckClick. You'll find me on my website, which is crystallkirkham.com. And from there, you can find pretty much everywhere else you can find me as well. Every social media except for TikTok, because I haven't updated that yet. I am usually either Crystal L. Kirkham or Canuck Click on every social media. So I make myself really easy to find. And I guess Steffi.
So I have a lot in the works right now that I don't think I'm allowed to share about just yet. But next week, not next week, next year, my self-editing guide, it's a book called I Can't Believe I Wrote That, will be coming out. So I can share the Goodreads link to that. And you can always find me on my website or also on Twitter, where I write a lot of threads on editing and writing. I think I've written somewhere something over 70 by now. So if that's okay, I can also share links to that.
Yeah,
Oh,
definitely okay.
over to Emmeline.
Well, I have a work in progress right now after many, many years of many, many drafts saved on my computer, paralyzed with fear and editing for other people. I'm writing the first in what's going to be a trilogy. It's young adult dystopia sci-fi. You can find me at Twitter and Instagram at Please Leave a Message. And if you are in need of an editor, a ghostwriter, or a sensitivity reader, you can find me at emusoediting.com.
Thank you for watching Editors Talk, how to self-evaluate your story structure. To learn more about Weeknight Writers events, including upcoming events, be sure to check out the video description below. You can also find links to Renaissance Press and the websites of all panelists in the video description.